The Nigerian Meteorological Agency, NIMET, specifically on the 20th of February 2024, presented the seasonal climate prediction and stressed the pros and cons of what each state may expect. And the forecast release indicates that rains will be delayed in some parts of the country and torrential in some other parts. According to NIMET, the states of Abia, Akwa Ibom, and Maiduguri, the largest city of Borno State, northeast Nigeria, was among the states predicted with early and heavy onset. And so, as forecasted by NIMET, residents of Maiduguri and the suburbs are presently hit hardest by the flood as anticipated. Thousands of occupants have fled their homes following a devastating flood in many parts of the Borno State capital. Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu today expressed deep concern about the recent flooding in that part of the country. The president, in a release issued by the Special Advisor on Information and Strategy, Bayo Onanuga, extended his heartfelt condolence to the government and people of the state, especially to the families that have lost their means of livelihood due to the disaster triggered by the overflow of the Alau Dam. While relevant authorities are still assessing the damage wrought by the flood, he called for the immediate evacuation of people from affected areas. With the federal government backing, the Borno State Governor, Professor Babagana Omara Zulum, has opened the Bakassi camp to accommodate those displaced by the flood and asked schools closed for a few days. In addition, the Borno State Emergency Management Agency is also watching and providing humanitarian assistance to the distressed in the camp. Now, this is why we will be focusing on flooding in Maiduguri. Welcome to Nigeria Today. I am Ikaria Clinton. Now, joining us to discuss the flooding in Maiduguri is Professor John Osonwa. He's a climate change and environmental expert. You're welcome to Nigeria Today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we also expected to be joined via Zoom by the DJ Borno State Emergency Management Agency, Dr. Bakind Mohammed Saidu. Hopefully, he'll be joining us very soon. So, Prof, the incident in Borno State, of course, quite a lot of people have been displaced by this flooding. How would you describe the situation?
It's pretty dire from what I have seen from the news coverage that I have seen. You look at the whole city, it is virtually submerged. And in some cases, houses are completely submerged. The roads that we are familiar with in Maiduguri are unrecognizable now because they are deeply inundated with water. There's no vehicular movement within some of the major streets. We're also hearing that the zoo, over 80% of the animals have died, and a lot of wild animals have also escaped. So it's a very severe situation, and I'm hoping we can get to some of the things that we can do to avoid similar situations in the future.
Really, that aspect of wild animals escaping is really scary.
Yes, it is. The level of inundation, the level of flooding, it's unprecedented because we're not dealing with usual flooding that comes from rainfall. This is a situation where a section of the dam has collapsed, and so you have a massive reservoir of water. This particular dam, Alau Dam, is about 50 square kilometers, the reservoir, and that's a massive millions and millions of tons of water. that is in that reservoir. So now that you have this collapse, much of that water is rushing into the city, and that's why we are seeing the massive flooding that has occurred. So we need to look at the history of the dam. We need to look at the maintenance record. We also need to look at the silting of the dam. Typically, when you have a dam of this nature, you need to have constant maintenance. You need to assess the integrity of the dam. This particular dam was built between 1984 and 1986, so it's almost 40 years old now. So that's a very long period of time, and you need to have a very diligent regimen of maintenance in order to maintain the integrity of the dam.
Okay. While you're talking about the dam, now, in your opinion, what could have been done differently, for us to have a different situation than what we have right now in Maiduguri?
I've touched on some of the issues, and again, it's not about apportioning blame yet. We don't know the full story behind what happened. But typically, and this is a generalized assessment, if you have a dam of this magnitude, there's supposed to be desilting of the dam. By that we mean you dredge the sand. Over time, as the water is flowing into the dam from the river, River Ngada in this place, in this instance, the water, as it's coming down, picks up a lot of debris along the banks of the river, even from the floor of the river. A lot of debris comes up. So when it gets into the dam, it deposits the debris because the dam becomes an embankment beyond which the water cannot flow. So whatever the water was carrying now sits at the bottom of the dam. And over time, that can accumulate. In some instances, you will find that the capacity of the dam has been diminished by up to 40% because of the sand and debris accumulation. So what you're supposed to do, periodically, you're supposed to dredge the dam, remove the debris, so that the capacity of the dam will remain. Most of the times when you have a dam collapse is because the capacity of the dam has been overreached.
Okay.
When you breach the limitation that the dam can hold, you're going to have some sections give way. And I believe that is what happened in this instance. The other issue is, over time, this is 40 years. Most of the dams are done with concrete, and you have water. The constant erosion of water and the interaction of water and concrete, over time, you find that the concrete can also become brittle. It weakens the concrete. So you're supposed to do a periodic integrity assessment of the dam to make sure that the walls are still intact.
How long should that be when you say periodic?
Well, a dam that's at least 20 years old should have more frequent integrity testing done to assess the strength. Because when you have a huge amount of water pushing against the dam wall, the retention wall, over time you may begin to see a weakening of the concrete, and in some cases it will give way, and I believe that's what happened in this case. So you also look at the equipment that is within the dam. Some of those equipments are designed to release the pressure on the dam when certain conditions arise. So if that equipment is not in optimal condition, first of all, it will not be able to warn the dam operators that you need to release some excess water. Dam management requires you periodically to release excess water, particularly when you have a heavy rainy season, as we have seen in this instance. So, so looking at the dam itself, those are some of the reasons that we need to interrogate further. How did this happen? Can it be avoided? You know, Nigeria has over 300 dams, and a lot of them are in similar situation in terms of the silting frequency. I read a report once that over 40% of the dams need to be desilted. They are not operating at full capacity. So that needs to happen, particularly given what is happening globally with climate change.
Okay, I was about coming to that part. I wanted to ask how much of the flooding can be attributed to climate change?
A lot of it can be attributed to climate change. See, climate change contributes to flooding in 3 different ways. The first one is that climate change leads to increased temperatures. As we are putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the temperature of the world all over is rising. We are breaking records almost every year. So that warming is also melting the Arctic ice. If you were to hold the world in your hand like a football, the top portion that you will be seeing as you're holding it, that's the Arctic Circle. And if you look at it on a map, it's always white. The reason it's white is because that is made up of ice. Ice that is as big as Africa, 30 million square kilometers of ice, as big as the whole continent of Africa. That ice has been there since the dawn of time, since eons of time. And the purpose of the ice is that it helps to maintain the weather cycle of the globe. Now, what is happening in the last 30 years or so, because of global warming, because of climate change, that ice has been melting at a very rapid pace. And what happens is when it melts, because it's water, it now flows into our strategic oceans, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, Barents Sea, and those excess water will now flow down to the coastlines and now permeate into the heartland through the rivers. So the rivers are higher already because you have a lot of Arctic ice. That 30 million square kilometers of ice, in the last 30 years, we have satellite images in the US. You will see that over half of that ice is gone forever. So that's why you have our sea level is higher now in most places, in Lagos, in the Niger Delta region. Some of these rivers, the water makes its way to the rivers. So when the rivers are already higher because of climate change, you don't need as much rain again to have flooding. So if you just have a little bit, it's like a bucket that is already almost full. So the amount of water you pour into the bucket will not be as much as if you had an empty bucket. So that's what we're dealing with now. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2, climate change also, because of the increased temperature, makes evaporation faster and more intense. So the water that comes to the ground evaporates, and because of the high temperature, it evaporates faster. So when the rain comes down, it comes down very heavily. So you're having more precipitation that's why you also have hurricanes and snow in some areas. But in Nigeria, comes down as rain. So in this particular instance, they had a lot of rain in Maiduguri over a short period of time. Now you're also looking at rivers that are higher because of Arctic ice. And so you had a combination of factors that led to the collapse of the dam.
Okay, now back to the Maiduguri issue. Now, what are the environmental risks Maiduguri faces that may lead to future flooding incidents from your, from what you've observed?
Well, the dam certainly is the major risk. That's number 1. But we're also finding that in a lot of these areas, people are building on floodplains. They are blocking the national drainage pathways through which water should flow and evacuate. There's a need to step up our vigilance when it comes to building codes and building approvals and permits. Sometimes people look at an area that is not fully occupied, and that could be because historically that was designated as a drainage pathway for water. So people will now come because that land now is cheap. They will buy and build in that place, blocking the natural pathway for water to drain. So when you have so much blockage, the water backs up and floods the community. It's a natural phenomenon. So we need to look at what we're doing with floodplains and how people are building. We also need to look at some areas are not fit for habitation. I have said it many times. You look at some of the areas within the Lokoja axis, stretching up to River Benue, Taraba axis, and even within this Maiduguri axis, people along the banks of the Ngada River, where this dam exists, some of those people should not be there because historically we've had flooding. This is not the first time Maiduguri has flooded. If you go back in the 1990s, there was flooding because of this dam. So sometimes the water will overflow, not that the dam has broken, but the water will become so large that it will overflow the dam. People get flooded. So that can also be a threat. So those people who are living on the banks of the river, they need to be evacuated and moved upland. So that's something that needs to happen, particularly now that we've seen the danger of living in those areas. So people need to be evacuated. Then one of the things we do in the U.S., when you have an area that is prone to flooding like this, you build levees, barriers. These are huge concrete works to surround a community. And now we even put in early warning systems on those walls, on those barriers. So if there's a water surge that is coming, those sirens will go off. I remember living as a young man in the United States. I lived at a city called New Bedford, and we had a huge levee. The levee was so huge you could actually drive your vehicle on top of the wall. It was that wide and that heavy. So the function, because we were right on the ocean, so sometimes when you see that the ocean is surging, you will hear alarms. Sirens will go off, so you will evacuate quickly. And the other problem we have is most of the time you find that flooding happens at night. That's why we have so much damage. Most of the rainfall comes at night, which also feeds into what I said about climate change. When you have excessive evaporation during the day, most days you notice you have very bright sunlight. Then in the evening it rains. Why? Because there was a tremendous evaporation of water. So it comes back down at night. So when you have that, it tends to happen at night. People are sleeping, they are not ready. So you may be asleep and suddenly the flood comes. Most of the flood that you find in Nigeria happen at night, just like this one.
Okay, so what can be done presently, in the immediate to mitigate the impact of this particular flood?
What they need to do is to evacuate certain communities. They have to be evacuated to higher ground. That's the first step. Then you need to begin to look at the water supply system. That's going to be the biggest threat, because when you have this scale of flooding, all the reservoirs, all the water resources, the wells have been flooded now, and they are contaminated because you're mixing feces with urine, with petrol, with everything has become flooded into the drinking water systems. So there needs to be massive deployment of clean water to the people of Maiduguri. Very, very important. Because if you don't do that, now you're going to have secondary consequences of the flood. You're going to have typhoid, proliferation of typhoid. You're going to have cholera. You're going to have dysentery. Then within the next few days, you're going to have mold build up and mildew, which will begin to affect the respiratory system of some people, particularly the vulnerable people, pregnant women, children, people who are sick. So those are some of the dangers that we face now. Of course, we've seen a lot of destruction. You're also going to see a lot of injuries, because if you can't see the ground, you wouldn't know whether there's a ditch, whether there's a gutter. So people may fall unwittingly into open spaces on the ground and injure themselves. So there needs to be a lot of intervention.
Okay. Now, tell us, you talk so much about the flood of in Borno State, talking about the one in Maiduguri right now, and we've had several cases of flooding. Recently, we had in Lagos, Jigawa and the rest of them. So, in some of this flood, what are some of the lessons that we should, as a matter of urgency, learn, and that should help us to ensure that we don't have recurring, cases of flooding in some other parts of the country?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is to understand that the flooding we're having now is very different from the one we used to see 20, 30 years ago. There are climatic factors now at play that we didn't have before. I've mentioned one. This issue of Arctic ice melting is a huge one, because if you have a situation where your rivers can no longer evacuate water naturally because the ocean is higher than the river, so the river cannot flow into the ocean if it's high. In fact, it backs up. So that's what happened in Bayelsa and some of these Niger Delta places. Water that used to flow through the tributaries and the Delta region is now backing up into the communities and flooding. Even I remember former President Jonathan's house was even flooded. So that is something we need to recognize, that the dynamics are different now. It's not just about rain. There are other factors. You have tremendous amount of ice that has gone into our oceans, into our rivers, and a lot of that water is there now. If you go to the Lekki, VI, VGC area now, you will find that the water has encroached on the land a lot. Some areas are always flooded now. Every little rain, why are they getting flooded? Because the sea level has risen and is not where it used to be. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is, because of the amount of greenhouse gases we're putting into the atmosphere is warming up the planet. As I said, if you look at we have the data in the US. If you look at the record for hottest years, you will find that in the last 15 years, we've broken the record over 12 times. Sometimes we eclipse the record from the previous year, which means there's a warming trend. So because of that, some of these dynamics will continue to play a role in what happens even in Africa. Arctic ice will put more water. Warming temperatures will lead to more evaporation. Then there's another factor in the north that we also need to be careful about, and that is the desertification of the soil. As the earth is warming up, it's leading to desertification. At this point in Nigeria, we are suffering the encroachment of the desert. 3.5 kilometers every year we're losing our land in the northern states, Borno included. So the land has become aridified, very solid, almost like concrete in some areas. So what happens is, when rain falls, it doesn't permeate, it doesn't go into the soil the way it should naturally. So it runs off, almost as if you pour water on concrete. It doesn't go in, it runs off. So that is also leading to what we call flash flooding, where you have a little bit of rain, within 10 minutes there's flooding, because the water is not soaking into the soil naturally. So that's also another aspect of climate change that we need to be mindful of.
Sure. I'll have to stop you here.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Prof. I've been talking to Professor John Osonwa, He is a climate change and environmental expert. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a
your
pleasure.
contribution.
Thank you.
And we couldn't, get the DG, Florida State Emergency Management Agency. I understand there was a little bit of network issues there. Okay, thank you. So thank you for being part of the program. Remember, Nigeria Today airs every weekday at 7:30 p.m. on NTU News 24. You can also check out this episode and others on www.youtube.com/NTU News 24 Hub. Once again, thank you for watching. I am your carrier, Clinton. Goodbye.